Jesus said, "There was a rich man who was dressed in purple and fine linen, who feasted sumptuously every day. And at his gate lay a poor man named Lazarus, covered with sores, who longed to satisfy his hunger and with what fell from the rich man's table, even though the dogs would come and lick his sores. The poor man died. It was carried away by the angels to be with Abraham. The rich man also died and was buried. In Hades, where he was being tormented, he looked up and saw Abraham far away with Lazarus by his side. He called out, 'Father Abraham, have mercy on me,' and sent Lazarus to dip the tip of his finger in water and cool my tongue, for I am in agony in these flames. But Abraham said, 'Child, remember that during your lifetime you received your good things, and Lazarus in a like manner evil things. But now he is comforted here, and you are in agony. Besides, all this between you and us is a great chasm, has been fixed, so that those who might want to pass from here cannot do so, and one can cross from here to us, so that no one can cross from here to us,' he said. 'Then, Father, I beg you to send him to my father's house, for I have 5 brothers, that he may warn them, so that they will not also come into this place of torment.' Abraham replied, 'They have Moses and the prophets. They should listen to them.' He said, 'No, Father Abraham, but if someone goes to them from the dead, they will repent.' He said to him, 'If they do not listen to Moses and the prophets, neither will they be convinced, even if someone rises from the dead.'" The gospel of the Lord.
Praise to you, Lord Christ.
Please be seated. Boy, I don't think I've done that in a very long time. And I think it happens once in a while so that you can be humbled. And so I'm humbled. By the way, that was really a wonderful opportunity I had last Sunday to be up in Anago and preaching with those people. Today's gospel, though, talks about something that I have real question about, and you should too. Who was there recording this conversation? Anybody here know? Well, it's a parable. So it really has a theological point. There's a story behind it. And I'd like to tell you that you are the 5 brothers to whom it was asked by the rich man, "Send them a word." Now you know from your theological background that if one were to be raised from the dead, they would not believe. Well, do we not have someone who was raised from the dead? Everybody should be able to raise their paw on that one. Yeah, we have Jesus. And what did he do upon his resurrection? He sent out his apostles to preach to the world. And yet, there are people who have not heard the gospel, but have heard the gospel and rejected it. I come from a very short Episcopal background. Maybe that's why I make mistakes up here. I was a Roman Catholic deacon for 20 years in the Diocese of Green Bay. And my primary ministry was to preach. Those folks sometimes do 5 masses on a Sunday. And so the burden after a number of years, they welcome guys like me to come along and take away some of the responsibility. I can tell you
that the Word of God is being preached everywhere. Yet I see in this culture less and less attention to the gospel and its values. We even have a famous preacher in our church in Washington, D.C. He's the dean of the Washington Cathedral. He said, and it was reported, "I am a non-theistic Christian." How do you become a non-theistic Christian? You believe that the principles of Christianity in the social values apply and are wise, but that there is not a God behind it. Well, there is a God behind it, and we've been faithfully led by Bishop Jacobus and his predecessors to recognize that in the gospel. There is a God, and God drives this world and drives you. And you don't even need to have a formal theological background in order to be able to understand that and embrace that. Because God said, "I will reach out to each one of them through their hearts." So your heart is a discerner of spirits. And what you have in the gospel is the teaching throughout all of Christian history in the New Testament that reveals that message over and over again as it was refracted through the life and the times of those apostles and the subsequent teachers. But they were like human beings, as you and I are, in those stained glass windows that beautifully allow the light of God in through them. And we are like those stained glass windows in that there's darkness where the light doesn't filter through, or where the light filters through fairly well, or where it comes through some clarity. And in each generation, we have to rediscover that light in our own lives. We stand on the shoulders of giants, the prophets and the teachers of the faith. But each of us must embrace that message. Each of us must get to know that word. There was a famous Roman theologian who was asked one time, "Do you believe in the devil?" And he said, "Well, yeah, okay." But he said, "You know, there's enough evil in the hearts of each one of us to make up for it, even if there wasn't. So we don't get caught up in proof testing whether or not there's devils." The other question asked of him, "Do you believe in hell?" And that would be another modern term for Hades or the Great Abyss. And his teaching was, maybe there is a hell, but I'm not sure there's anybody in it. Because Jesus descended, and when he rose, he brought up all with. Wow. You know, that's a hard message for me to embrace, because I, like you, have access to public media and we hear terrible, terrible things that seem to be subhuman, done by fellow human beings to other human beings. And if it was left up to me, yeah, there would be such a place, and I could even suggest some names. Of course, excluding myself. But the thing is that that's not where our faith rests, on whether or not there's devils and whether or not there's a hell. Our faith rests on other things. And I suggest to you that you own that yourself. You own the truth that there is a God. And how did he make us in their image? Because that's the word, their image. Mercy, kindness, compassion, love. That is how we're made in the image of God. I'm a retired Department of Corrections employee, as I was telling somebody. I've worked with people who killed other people and done other terrible things. I never found a person, though, in which there wasn't some good that was worth building on. So rather than using shame and guilt and mere punishment, get their attention. But on the other hand, build on what is good about them. Give them hope. Give them light. Be a blessing to them. Does that not include all of us in some way? If we only focus on our shame and our guilt, what do we do with that? You get depressed, you got to take medication, drink alcohol, hurt yourself. And I've been with people who have, at some time in their life later, hurt themselves and are no longer with us. Redemption is what we're about. That's the message of today's gospel. Each one of us, it has to be responsible. We're those 5 brothers. Each one of us, each one of those brothers has to hear the prophets in your New Testament, in the Old Testament. Each one of us has to come to understand what God is saying to us. Can't depend upon somebody else. You have to take responsibility for your own faith. So when people say, well, I don't get anything out of going to church, what did you put into it? Would be a good question. I have a very recent personal story that I'll share with you, is that my father was 92 and my uncle, who was 82, 11 years apart, died within 3 months of one another. I had not seen my first cousins, there's 3 boys, since I was 18 in the Army, passing through their community on the way home on a holiday. They were 12, 11, and 3. I was 18. So about 50 years later, they're finding me. I didn't know their addresses. They'd grown up, had marriages, children, moved around. But they found me, and they invited me to come out and meet with them. I was moved with love. And then they found my middle sister. I don't know how to get a hold of the other 2. I have 3 sisters. But the middle sister lived out in California where they were, and they found her somehow. She does house sitting for a living. She has a post office box. And she has an email which is ... her name at My Way. I don't know if there's such a legitimate site, but that really said it all, My Way. And so anyway, I called her up when I was out there and said, hello, Roxy. I go by Roxana. Okay, Roxana, this is your brother, Chuck. I'd like to stop by and see you, if that's possible. Okay. I said, when? And she said, 2 or 3 days. Oh, well, okay. So I found her. She lives in someone else's home in Berkeley. And so anyway, we went and visited. The first thing she said, I'm an atheist. Okay, that's a starting point. I didn't come out to convert. I came out to be your brother and to listen to whatever you want to tell me. The other thing is, I have stage 3 breast cancer, and I'm not doing any traditional medicine. I'm just eating well, following a very good diet, which she sent out to me later, which is just a standard good diet based on vegetables, no meats, and all that kind of thing. I looked at her. I said, Roxanne, I put my hands on both sides of her cheeks and said, I love you. And you are so beautiful. She's a 65-year-old woman who has lost about 50 or 60 pounds and is now down near appropriate body weight. And I said, I just want to be your brother. All these years that we've not had contact. I thought in a moment there, that I was in some way being asked by God just to be me as a brother, not to be clergy, not to preach, not to judge, but to embrace. I think my sister, in her own way, is living in a form of hell. And I'm having real problems thinking that the God that has given me a wonderful life would sentence her to eternity to suffer in flames. I believe in love. I'm not stupid. I'm well educated. I have 33 years of ministerial experience, 2 master's degrees, 1 in social work, 1 in theology. I work with the Department of Corrections, with probation and parole cases, as I've said before. And I've seen wonderful transformation in lives. Because hearts were open, because people wanted to know that there was more about their life than the circumstances in which they were in at that time. If, Abraham had allowed a finger to be dipped in the water and taken into the rich man's suffering tongue, would it have changed anything? I didn't hear anything about how wealth made a person any more a person of God and close to God, nor Lazarus, his poverty made him anything special to God. I think what made Lazarus special was he lived the circumstances of his life with humility and with love. And in that, he took and made silk purses out of a sow's ear. In a few minutes, I'm going to stop, and we're going to continue in our worship. I want to ask you to remember, when you get to the Lord's Prayer, and it says, "Forgive me my trespasses, as I forgive others," which is kind of interesting, and I've got to give it away in order to receive it. If I went around the room and asked everybody, who do you want to forgive? I ask you, how many would you say, I want to forgive me? I want to forgive me for the things I did intentionally and not intentionally, just like our opening prayer says. What is that little thing that keeps gnawing on you? Probably out of childhood, but there are probably some other things. And so every time I ask you that you say that prayer, that you remember to include yourself and let God be your God. Let God take away that pain and that suffering that you somehow don't let God into yet. And that's all right, in a sense, because you're human. But to be like that stained glass window, what part of that appeals to you when you come in? Is it the light or is it the dark? And to me, the choice is, it's whatever you feel you need to address. Do you need to be grateful to God for the prophets? Do you need to be grateful to God for the suffering that Jesus did for you? Do you need to be grateful for all the apostles and all the faithful people, the saints of heaven, who have come down to you to this day? Or do you need to go in there and deal with the darkness that keeps the rest of it from being all light? So we are like individual, beautiful stained glass windows. And God's there for you, wherever you are at. In your baptism, He made promises to you that stick. He never renegotiates the contract. He doesn't forget about it. He doesn't fall asleep and not pay attention. He doesn't say, away with you. Rather, He says, I'm here 24/7 to be for you when you come and ask. And He tells you in the heart, hey, here I am. It's so wonderful that you can live with that. You can live in the light. You can be drawn to it. And you can be drawn to the Eucharist, which was made through suffering and death, then resurrection. So you can bring your suffering and death in your life, enter into that grave, and come back out at the call of Jesus, who says, come, my son, my daughter, my beloved, to the Father who awaits for you. And any groanings you make in your expressions about that, are made perfect to the Father through the action of the Holy Spirit.